Good morning. My name is Steve Reed, and I am a pastor at Live Oak. Oh my gosh, I'm a pastor at H2O Church in Orlando and a mental health counselor, licensed mental health counselor. And apparently my brain is somewhat scattered this morning and just flashed back to 20 years ago. So there you have it. Hey, I hope that you had a chance over this weekend to celebrate freedom. My wife and I got a chance to go to a small town near Orlando and be with another couple with social distancing, and we had a chance to watch their parade, and it was great. Their small town decided that instead of having the local band march through the streets and everything, that they got everybody that was going to be on the parade on vehicles, and then they drove down almost every single street in the little town. And that was just a lot of fun to be part of it and to have a chance to celebrate freedom and listen to all the honks and wave, and we had some flags, and it was just a great fun time. And so I hope that you had a chance to celebrate freedom. And this month with Mental Health Mondays, we're going to be looking at freedom from 4 different perspectives. And so, this is that place where we take a bite-sized piece of mental, spiritual, or emotional health to grow in awareness, because awareness gives room for movement, and movement can lead to freedom. And it is for freedom that Christ set us free. So today, as we jump in, we're going to be looking at freedom from intrusive thoughts. Those are those kinds of things that sometimes that thought runs through your brain and you go, wow, I must really be selfish, or I must really be lustful, or I must really be a bad person, because that thought is like running around in my brain. And we're going to take a look at those and kind of unpack some different responses to those kinds of happenings that go on in our brain. So there's research, interesting research that they did in the University of Minnesota. A psychologist by the name of Eric Klinger interviewed, actually they hooked up a number of students with a recording apparatus and a beeper. And what they did was every time that individual would get a beep on the beeper, they would be asked to record whatever their thought was. And they did this over a period of time and cataloged all the results, and they found that there was some variation, of course, but generally speaking, we have about 500 unintentional intrusive thoughts a day. 500. And so if you have a few that bug you, just kind of recognize that that's probably a few out of 500 that are running through our brains every day. And so they last an average of about 14 seconds. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. Most of them are just kind of everyday life thoughts. Oh, I need to get toothpaste on my way home. And yet some of them, about 18% they found, fit into this category that we would consider unacceptable or uncomfortable or just plain bad. And then another 13 on top of that, 13% would fit into that category that we might call ugly or out of character or even murderous or perverse. And so this was very significant research finding out that, hey, all of us have some significant incidents of thoughts running through our brain that are not what we would normally think about. And Klingler basically said, look, here's what happens. The preconscious brain is always scanning the world around us. It's looking for cues that tap into our emotions. And when they hit a trigger, there's this, what he calls a renegade thought. It bursts out of nowhere and just is there. And it's not something that we've planned. It's not something that we've thought about. It's not even something that we control. There's a neuroscientist, Sam Harris, and he calls these random thoughts, and he says that they are completely out of our control. He's written a book called Free Will, and in that book he says, the idea that we as conscious beings are deeply responsible for the character of our mental lives is simply impossible to map onto reality. And we find in Scripture some validation of that. In James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, it says, "But each one of us is tempted," so there's a category, temptation, "when he is carried away," so he's grabbed a hold of and it's grabbed him, "and enticed by his own lust," so there's another category, is lust. "And then, when lust is conceived, it gives birth to sin." And so there are these at least two categories that are not sin. One is a temptation, and one is lust, and then there is sin. And so it is helpful to kind of recognize that even scripturally there's different categories, and some of them it doesn't seem to indicate that we're as in control of than the others. And so in his book he narrows down 5 different kinds of these explosive, random thoughts that go through our brains. And these are more of the disruptive and ugly ones, okay? So he's not talking about the everyday life ones. And one category, he says, is morbid. One category, he says, is sexually perverse. One of them is prejudice. One of them is kind of the "your fall is my pick-me-up." And another one is this category of violent thoughts. And we find too that Scripture invites us into that range of reality as well. When we're invited into in 1 John chapter 2, where it says that for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. So there's those 3 categories. There's the lust of the flesh. There are those things that we would consider necessarily calling lust, and they're in the sexual range, but also in the hungry, the greedy, the gluttonous range. The lust of the eyes, and that is the jealousies and the "I wish I could have," or I'm sad that they got that and I didn't. And then there's the boastful pride of life, which is all those other things that are about me being as amazing as I am and you're not, and those kinds of thoughts. And so it's interesting that Scripture puts all of these in that lust category, which is not sin. It is different. It can be tempted by that lust, and we want to be careful of it. And we're going to take a look at that in just a little bit. But it is helpful for us to recognize that there are different things that we're responsible for. And this research seems to indicate that we're not responsible for every single thought that runs through our mind just because it's there. And so, but because it's there, it can be very disruptive, right? And so those morbid thoughts might be things about death, or things along those lines, or hurting, and then the sexual perverse. Of course, there's that whole category. And then there's prejudice, and prejudice is this interesting thing. It's about comparison. It's about me being here and you, whoever you are, being over here, and less than. And it could be less than because I'm smarter than you, less than because you're lazy, less than. It could be racially, but it doesn't have to be racially. It can be gender focused. It can be all kinds of things. It's I'm here and you're not. And so all of those thoughts and things that run through our brains, and he says everybody has those things in that category. And then there's the your fall is my pick-me-up. I feel better when you drop down. I feel better about myself, and I want to have compassion on you, but I also kind of feel good that it wasn't me. And then there's a whole category of violent thoughts. So one of the things we want to be thinking about then, of course, is, wow, this thought just ran through my brain. What do I do about that? I either don't like that thought, or I think about that thought. If I had that thought, then I must be bad, or I can't get rid of that thought, and we start kind of going, oh no, if I think about that, I must be a bad person. Stop thinking about that. I need to stop thinking about that. Okay, I'm going to make a mental note to stop thinking about that. And it's very interesting how our brains work. And we're going to talk about 4 responses to having an intrusive thought 3 of them are for that category that are kind of that unacceptable, uncomfortable, or just plain bad, and then 1 of them is for that ugly, out of character, or even murderous and perverse category, so the even more worse category. So the first thing is what we might call the white bear response, and this is coming out of research that was done by psychologist Daniel Wergner, and he basically said, okay, so you guys, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and for the next 5 minutes, whatever you do, I don't want you to think about a white bear. Every time you think about a white bear for the next 5 minutes, I want you to ring this bell. And then this other group, he said, okay, for the next 5 minutes, you can think about whatever you want. You can think about white bears, you can think about anything else that you want to, but anytime you think about a white bear, go ahead and ring the bell. And very interesting that in that 5-minute period, what happened was those that were told, do not think about white bears, rang the bell twice as often as those who were allowed to think about whatever they wanted to, including white bears. And so there's something that happens in our brain. If I say, don't think about white bears, there's a piece of my brain that starts scanning all the time. Am I thinking about white bears? Am I thinking about white bears? Am I thinking about white bears? And so my brain is like keyed into thinking about white bears. And so what he says as far as research goes is like, take a different approach. And he calls it radical acceptance. It's like, oh, I'm thinking about white bears. Look at that. Okay. It's okay that I'm thinking about white bears. It's just a thought. And then we can let it go, and our brain doesn't go into that, I better not think about that. And it doesn't go on time, always scanning, am I thinking about that? And actually the brain can let it go more easily. And so that's the beginning place is number 1 is radical acceptance, or that white bear response. Okay? The second one is based on some research at the Ohio State University, and this was about actually journaling and had to do with write it down and then take it and throw it away. Put it in the trash, burn it, tear it up, shred it, do whatever you want to once you've written it down, tear it up and get rid of it. Our brain is able to let it go more easily. And so we looked at that, kind of a version of that when we were looking at journaling. So those 2 things are 2 potential responses to intrusive thoughts. Another one is interesting, that if I'm having this intrusive thought and I'm trying to let it go, but it kind of keeps on coming back, one study says, well, stand up, walk through wherever you are, a building, a house, whatever you are, go to a doorway into another room, pause in the doorway and step through. That there's something actually transitional about doorways, that when we move into another room, it helps our brain let go of the short-term things we were thinking about and focusing on. And so just move to the next room and purposely find something in that room to get involved in and think about. So that's 3 different ways, and those are all kind of pertaining to that lower level response, kind of mildly intrusive. Okay, and then we're going to get to that obsessive and troubling thoughts. Those that this is not okay. It's not okay that I think about this. It's not okay that I dwell on this. I don't want to think about this anymore. And so the obsessive, troubling thoughts, and this is actually from research by James Pennebaker, who you may recall as one of the first researchers on journaling. And we talked about him last month a couple times. And so here he is again with research on intrusive thoughts, especially obsessive, troubling thoughts. And not surprising, his response is, well, journal it. Take about 10 minutes and write out everything. If I do this, whatever that thought is, if I do this, it'll lead to that. If I do that, it'll lead to this. What's life going to be like? Just kind of let it all play out all the way through. Yeah, this is a technique that is oftentimes used for somebody who is dealing with an addiction. If somebody is dealing with alcohol addiction and they've had some period of sobriety, and then somebody says, hey, I'm going to go to this party or this wedding, and I hear it's going to be an open bar, and suddenly, bam, they're thinking about that totally, and it's hard to let that go, and they start obsessively thinking about it. Well, one of the techniques that is used is play that all the way through. If I have that drink because it's a party and I'm expected to, and then I know where that goes. I won't have just two. I won't have just three. I'll keep on going. I'll do something stupid. I'll break something that I shouldn't break, my vows or even anything else, and here's where life will end up, and suddenly I've played it all the way out, and I can actually see the end instead of what that very beginning seems to promise. And so that's a helpful tool. And he says, just take 10 minutes. Don't let it go more than 10 minutes, but play it all the way out. And even ask those questions like, why do I think I'm having these thoughts? Does it have any relationship to what's going on in my life these days? Why do they bother me so much? Oftentimes they bother me because they're out of character. They're actually not like me. And that's helpful to know. Oh, that thought's not like me, so I can let it go. And it might even be, so is it related to things that have happened in the past or even in the present in my life now? And the more I understand about kind of why this might be surfacing now, the more it is easy to let it go. And so those are 4 different responses to thoughts that are intrusive in different kind of categories. Recognize that there is a responsibility that we are given by the Lord to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So it's not saying, hey, just don't worry about what you think about. It's just more that the brain has these things that are firing all over the place. There may be a spiritual attack. There may be just thoughts that are randomly going through my brain. But just because there's thoughts going through my brain does not mean that I'm bad. It does not mean that I'm a failure. It does not mean that I have no character or am not in control. It does not mean I'm crazy. It means I'm part of humanity, and humanity apparently has about 500 unintentional, intrusive thoughts a day. And so recognizing that and recognizing, okay, so the pathway forward is noticing that they're there, or just dismissing them, or kind of if they're very intense and they seem to be wanting to grab a hold of me, then playing it out all the way and tearing it up, letting it go. I can do some things to move into other places. And so recognizing that July is for freedom, what we're talking about today, what we've been talking about, is just those things that are the besetting thoughts, and they can be intense at times. And so my prayer for you this week is that when those come up, that whether it's the white bear response, whether it's just writing it and discarding it, whether you're moving to another room, or whether you're just playing it out all the way and just kind of letting it go, and asking the Lord through His Spirit to just kind of help me move into these other things. We don't want to get into that place where we're setting our brain into scanning. Oh no, I'm not thinking about that, am I? I'm not thinking about that, am I? Because that actually intensifies it. So walk in freedom this week. That's my prayer for you. It's been really, really great to be with you. I hope this is helpful for you. It's helpful for me. And if it does seem like it's helpful for you, feel free to put a comment down so that I know kind of what you're thinking, or feel free to share it, pass it on to others, because that's how people find out about this. We're not doing any additional marketing or anything, and if it's helpful, then pass it on. It's a blessing being able to be with you. Take care.